can't really remember when I heard the song, first heard or sang Spirit of Life. I assume it would have been sometime after 1993, since it was part of the new hymnal we now call Singing the Living Tradition. I'm not sure if it was in the supplement that preceded that hymnal, though it might have been. But I do know that, like many other Unitarian Universalists, I've come to love and cherish this piece of music. I've used it in both UU and non-UU settings, and it's always been well received. Now, the notion of spirit, or its cognate spirituality, can cause problems for some Unitarian Universalists, especially those like me who look at the world from a humanist perspective. There was a time in my life when I was at best indifferent and often downright hostile to the notion of spirit and spirituality. It is only in more recent times, as I have grown older, more introspective, and more open to the different ways of looking at the world, that the ideas of spirit and spirituality have gained a foothold in my personal life experience. Well, I'm sure that this has been a gradual process. There are a few events in my personal journey that have taken me toward a richer and fuller inner life. To start with, my decision to become a Unitarian Universalist in 1988 or 89 opened my heart and mind to a dimension of life I had previously ignored. Until I discovered Unitarian Universalism, religion for me had required an assent to the truth of certain propositions that I simply found incredible. God making a virgin pregnant, a man walking on water, a dead person coming back to life. I didn't realize that there was another path that did not require that I check my credulity at the door. And this in turn allowed me to explore other ideas under the broad rubric of religion and spirituality. One aspect of my life that I began to explore more deeply at this time was the issue of my masculine identity and what that really meant. This led me to involvement in what we call men's work. About 17 years ago, as part of that journey, I attended something called a male spirit retreat in Woodstock, Illinois, which is in the northern part of Illinois. It was led by three men from different religious and spiritual backgrounds. One was a former Catholic priest, a Jesuit who had served on the Lakota reservation, but ended up marrying, leaving the priesthood, and going into practicing psychotherapy. One is a man that to this day is one of my closest friends. He grew up in a Jewish household with a father who was a Holocaust survivor, but whose spiritual path has turned to Buddhism in general and the order of inner being of Thich Nhat Hanh in particular. And then finally a third man who was a Dominican brother that had some differences with his order because of his sexual orientation. But these three men got together and put on a variety of weekend retreats, one of which I attended. Over the course of that weekend, we sang, we danced, we shared our lives, and I participated in my first sweat lodge in the middle of January in northern Illinois with below zero wind chill temperatures. Figure that one out. But for me, the most amazing part of the weekend occurred at the end. While waiting for my ride home, I had gone back into the main room where we had spent most of the retreat. Most of the men had already left, and the room was empty. Yet I could feel a palpable sense of energy, seemingly left by the spirits of the men who had spent the weekend in that room together. It was eerie, but it was comforting. Another seminal experience was being present at the death of my father. On a late September afternoon in 1997, my father was in his bed in my parents' apartment. He had prostate cancer, and it had become pretty clear that last couple of days, as often happens with cancer, that he was going downhill pretty quickly. We weren't really sure how much time he had left. The hospice people that were there were in the process of assembling a hospital bed so that he could be more comfortable, and they had decided to get some additional higher octane pain medications that he had been taking. We had called my sisters and told them if they could get there, they should come as quickly as they can. Late in the afternoon, I was getting ready to take a run to the pharmacy to pick up some pain medications. But the hospice nurse who was there with us stopped me, and she said, "Jim, I don't think you ought to go. I think the end is pretty near." And because of her alertness to his condition, I was able to be present when he died. I was able to hold his hand, to tell him that I loved him, and to be with him as he breathed his last breath. I shall never forget the power of that experience. Since that time as a chaplain, I've been present for the deaths of a number of my patients, and they're all very powerful events. But for me, this first time remained most indelibly etched on my mind, my soul, my spirit. So what is this spirit thing that I'm talking about, that Carolyn McNade wrote about and that we sing about? Not just in Spirit of Life, but in our opening hymn this morning, Gather the Spirit, as well as other favorite hymns, such as Every Time I Feel the Spirit, and You Gotta Do When the Spirit Says Do. Well, Steve this morning talked about one of the words that has its origins in spirit. I'd like to go into a couple of other ancient languages as well. The word spirit actually has its origins in the Latin verb spirare, or its noun equivalent spiritus. The Greek word pneuma and the Hebrew word ruah have similar meanings. The Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary offers a more contemporary definition. Defines spirit as the force within a person that is believed to give the body life, energy, and power, or the inner quality or nature of a person. The spirit, or sometimes it's called our soul, is that characteristic that makes us more than simply electrical and chemical machines encased in skin and skeleton. It is our self-consciousness and our self-awareness that's part of what it means for us to be human. Spirit is more than our mind and our ability to think and reason. It is more than our feelings. It is that indefinable more that makes us human. Now, this is not to say that other beings do not have spirit. Those of us that have had a big or small animal companion knows that there's more going on in those creatures than merely respiration and heartbeat. We may not share a common language to talk about it, but we know that it's there. And spirit is not only an individual manifestation of the self. Groups of people can collectively manifest spirit as well. See school spirit. See the Badger crowd at the Nebraska game yesterday. And anyone who has participated in the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly knows what I mean. Each General Assembly begins with a banner parade, where representatives of each congregation who are attending march through the meeting hall carrying a distinctive banner representing their particular society or congregation or fellowship. A feeling of excitement and pride fills the room and all the people in it, realizing that we are part of something more, something much greater than our individual selves and our individual congregations. We are engaged with the spirit of Unitarian Universalism. Now, I'm sure followers of other religious and spiritual traditions have the same feeling when they gather together. And that concept of spirit is in fact present in many different religious traditions. For example, in Genesis 1, verse 2, the second verse in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, the writer describes the Spirit of God. The Spirit of God, also translated as wind, presumably from the Hebrew ruah, as moving over the face of the water. And then the chapter goes on to describe God's work of creation. Now, while the God of Genesis 1 is also described in very anthropomorphic terms, walking in the garden in the cool of the evening, interacting with Adam and Eve, the first description of God that we find in the Bible is as Spirit. In the earliest of the written Gospels, the Gospel of Mark, Jesus makes his first appearance when he is baptized by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. And the author of Mark reports, when he, Jesus, came up out of the water, Immediately he saw the heavens opened and the Spirit descending upon him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven saying, "Thou art my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." And of course there is that enigmatic figure from Pentecost, who a Roman Catholic theologian friend of mine refers to as the underemployed third person of the Trinity, the Holy Spirit. Or as I like to refer to it, as the Spirit of the Holy. In the book of Acts, the Holy Spirit is described as coming with the rush of a mighty wind and manifesting itself of tongues of fire resting on the heads of the apostles. Again, spirit or wind or breath. Buddhist monk and teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, in his book Living Buddha, Living Christ, recounts a conversation he had with a Catholic priest in Florence who expressed a wish to learn more about Buddhism. Thich Nhat Hanh asked him to share his understanding of the Holy Spirit. The priest replied, "The Holy Spirit is the energy sent by God." Thich Nhat Hanh observed that he was happy with the answer and that he concluded that the safest way for a Buddhist to approach the Trinity would be through the Holy Spirit. And in doing this, Thich Nhat Hanh drew parallels between the Holy Spirit and the practice of mindfulness that he teaches. Thich Nhat Hanh said, "When mindfulness is in you, the Holy Spirit is in you. And your friends will see it, not just by what you say, but through your whole being." Now, how might we then find a sense of spirit in Unitarian Universalism? Well, as with many similar questions for you use, the only correct answer could be, it depends. For some staunch humanists, it is a question neither worth asking nor answering. What is important to folks like this is that that which we can touch, we can hear, we can see or smell, that's what's important. Anything outside of the realm of the senses is not worth considering. Yet for many of us, such an outlook may not be enough. It does not satisfy the need to deal with the mysteries of life. If I might, I'd like to recount another personal experience. My home congregation, First Unitarian Society, is housed, for those of you who may not be aware of it, in a Frank Lloyd Wright designed building. And we are right across the street from University of Wisconsin Hospital, and in fact, right across the street from the emergency room and the helicopter pad up on top, which gets interesting on a Sunday morning when a med flight comes in. One fall afternoon, after it had become dark, I was leaving the ER. I had just looked in on a client of mine who had suffered a stroke earlier in the day and was in the emergency room, was intubated, and had a breathing tube. I was her power of attorney for health care and had just talked with the doctors about her prognosis. They had told me that it wasn't very good, and it recommended removal of the breathing apparatus. And when I asked what would happen if we did that, they said she would probably die. Never having been able to get her to talk with me about her health care wishes, I really wasn't sure what to do. And I felt like I needed to think it over overnight, talk to some of her friends and family to get some kind of a sense of what they thought she would want. And so I left the ER very troubled about what to do next. And as I looked across the street, I saw the prow of the meeting house, the area in the front that sort of sticks out in a kind of a long point with clear glass windows. And we were bathed in the internal light. The lights were on inside the auditorium, and the glow just came out from the prow. Now, as the leader of the congregation at that time, I had somewhat of a love-hate relationship with the building. But at that moment, it provided me with a sense of comfort and well-being to help me get through that difficult time. It was, if you were, the spirit of that place and what it meant to me as I struggled with these life and death issues. That place supported me. Now, by spirit, I don't mean some magical aura that engulfed me. Rather, I suspect it was the spiritual community that it represented that gave me comfort. But the light from the building, which I can still see in my mind's eye, enveloped me with a tangible sense of warmth and peace. that helped to carry me through a very difficult time. And so this brings me back to Spirit of Life. I'm sure that for many of us, this song provides the same sense of comfort that the light of the prow brought me that night. So I'd like to look at it a little bit more closely, if I might. Spirit of Life. We call to the life forth within us, the breath of life, if you will. As a chaplain and a spiritual caregiver, prayer is part of my practice. And when I pray, I invoke the Spirit of life, sometimes the Spirit of health and healing, which many of my patients may call God. But for me, it is a spirit or a life force which envelops the entire cosmos. Come unto me. Now, while I do not accept the concept of a personal God who watches over me by day or by night, I do carry this Spirit of life within me. It is a part of who I am, and it is with me as I live in the world. Sing in my heart. It is said that the longest journey is from the head to the heart. I know that this has been true for me. Much of the work that I've done in the last 10 years of what we call my ministerial formation has been that journey and how I travel that road. That is a journey many of us are on, I believe, and we cannot take a journey without fuel. The Spirit of life is what we carry with us to provide the energy and the power to sustain us in that travel. All the stirrings of compassion. Our hearts, if you will, are the seat of our compassion. Why do we act compassionately? It's not really because compassionate behavior will necessarily benefit us. Often it's quite to the contrary. Acting compassionately may cost us time and money. Those to whom we show compassion may never be in a position to return the favor. Rather, our hearts tell us that being compassionate is the right thing to do. And we respond to those stirrings. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. It has been said, justice first, then charity. When we act compassionately toward those who are in need, we act from a stance of justice. We are reminded that we live in an unjust world. We have a political and economic system that seems to be rigged in favor of the haves and promotes inequality of both opportunity and result. Thus, our work is not just to show compassion, but to attack the very foundations of systemic justice, injustice, and inequality. Roots hold me close. Our faith and value are the roots that ground us and support us in the storm and strife of life. They keep us close to the source of our strength, to that Spirit of life that provides our energy and power to live a compassionate and justice-filled life. Wings set me free. There comes a time in each of our lives when we must let go. We must fly away and find our own path. It is the tension between the power of the roots to give us a sense of home and the power of the wings to help us find the new frontiers that gives completeness to our life. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Like our physical being, which requires food and water and attention to flourish, so does our spirit. For some, that means an intentional spiritual practice like prayer or meditation. For others, it is spending time in the natural world, from which many of us receive sustenance. For others, it may mean simple physical exercise. And a spiritual community like this one is a place where we can join others in our quest for support and strength. In our Sunday services, we set apart a time in our busy schedules to intentionally slow down and attend to our spiritual lives, both as individuals and as part of the worshiping community. In other congregational activities, whether educational, social, spiritual, or justice-seeking, we find ways to put our spirits into action. So as we leave here today, let us be mindful of our spirit. Let us cherish it, care for it, hold it close. Let us remember that we are more than simply physical beings. And let us live lives of compassion and justice-seeking. And so as I conclude this reflection, I invite you to again rise in body or spirit and join in singing once more Spirit of Life, number 123. Spirit of life, come unto me, sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion, blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me. Please be seated. Just take a few minutes for a few short comments. And I would invite you to a practice that we do sometimes in our religious education called step up, step back. If you are one who is reluctant to offer your comments, we invite you to step forward. For those of us that are more likely to want to be heard, and that's not a bad thing, but we invite you to perhaps step back and offer an opportunity to some other folks. If they don't take it, then go for it. I'll solve that problem.
I consider myself somebody who should step back, but so I'll keep it short. Is this on?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh.
I just wanted to point out, I got out the hymnal and I thought the lines too, the blow in the wind and rise in the sea, I think that brings to my mind the interdependent web of life and how we often can hear the Spirit more out in nature, and I think that's something that a lot of the people in the fellowship feel. Thank you for your words. I just wanted to draw attention to those couple of lines. And I also saw Tracy signing, and I think we should have her teach us the signing for this hymn sometime.
Very good words, Jim. It's interesting that Jeff Reed and I were talking about spirituality, or what does spirituality mean? And I actually had an experience with somebody who no longer comes to the Unitarians saying that there was something spiritually lacking in the Unitarians, and it didn't float her boat, so to speak. And I think it was, in my opinion, maybe the idea of the comforting feeling that there was this Holy Spirit, this big force that's kind of there in a conventional Christian type of setting that we lack. But then, as you said today, there are so many other places you can go for spirituality, and perhaps the problem was maybe for us Unitarians, it's complicated.
Well, I had an experience when I did my first unit of clinical pastoral education. One of my peer group colleagues was a Roman Catholic woman who worships with a spiritual community in Madison. And she says, Jim, aside from telling me she was glad she had somebody to the left of her theologically in the group, she said, Jim, a lot of what you say I really can buy into, but there's something missing, seems to me. And that's where at the spiritual level, and that's where I really started thinking about it. That they're, trying to figure out how do you do that? How do you get to that? And particularly, how do I get to it as somebody who's pretty left-brained? Yeah, Margaret.
Well, as you know, for my people, everything is sacred. Spirit is present in everything at all times. When the missionaries came and sought to impart their particular world view, and we spoke back to them about how we viewed the world, they were the ones who initiated the term Great Spirit. But for the Ojibwa, which is Gitche Manitou, doesn't actually translate into Great Spirit. It translates into Great Mystery. And also, I think Wankataka does too in the Lakota language. But it's, you know, it's there. I mean, it's not something we imagine. We are imminently conscious of it at all times, under all circumstances, and it's our connection to the cosmos. And the cosmos, as we had a workshop here last week where the lady was talking about the cosmos, and how the cosmos, and I love this, I hope I get it right because somebody had the card, it said, when we go out and look at the stars on a star-embellished night, it is the universe looking back at us and seeing itself as a human. And to me, that's the essence of spirit.